Okay, here we are. Kinesiology 230. We're now in chapter 14. And in chapter 14, they talk about cardiovascular exercise techniques. And broadly based, this chapter, they go into machines and non-machines. My goal with this is just to present to you an overview of the chapter because a lot of it is going to be pretty darn self-explanatory and pretty darn easy to figure out. The book goes into some nuance that I don't really think is needed all that much. And I know the questions that will be asked of you when you go ahead and take the certification exam. And also we have an in-class exam and quiz. And those are the types of things I'll focus on. So I don't think we really need to spend a ton of time. There's only two presentations, one of which is machines and the other is non-machines. And I want to get into this and get going. When you talk about recommendations for cardiovascular equipment, you'll have clients who will come to you and say, I used to run a lot with my running, now my knee hurts, I can't run. And so as a result, I'm going to go ahead and do the elliptical. You need to be able to find a common denominator between those, like running at a certain pace on a treadmill. What does that equate to on an elliptical? It's not like comparing apples to chocolate. It's not completely different, but it's, like one type of apple, maybe a Granny Smith and a Pink Lady, I don't know, or a Fuji, right? Where those you might have like different types of apples. You have to compare to different types of apples when you talk with a client. And then you have to be able to provide, you know, basic advice when it comes to running and basic advice when it comes to working out. And I would urge you to maybe read through some of this so you have a little better understanding of some of the nuances that they're looking for in the book. The big things come down to just hip joint, knee joint, ankle joint. Are they in alignment? Do you have any kind of Q angle valgus or vargus going on in the knee, ankle, and hip complex? And then they go into talking about group exercise classes and also matching clients with activities that are compatible to their preferences. So with cardiovascular activities, they can be classified into machine and non-machine, as I noted. Cardiovascular activities can be also warm up and cool down activities to help the cardiovascular system adjust to perhaps a selected exercise that you're going to do. You use a bike to warm up, to fire up the quads a little bit before you go do leg press. So warm up on a piece of cardiovascular equipment. And I have to kind of set this disclaimer, and I talk about it with my clients because they'll ask, well, it's cardiovascular. Am I actually getting any strength training? And to a certain degree, it's yes, because it's very low level resistance compared to like a squat or a leg press. But when you're on a bike, if you're doing 60 revolutions per minute, well, that means 30 times a minute you're pushing with the right foot and 30 times a minute you're pushing with the left foot. And so as a result, there's a contraction that's happening there. So you have a contractile response that's happening to do that exercise. Now, granted, it's very type A, it's very much on the mitochondrial side and the oxidative side, but you still have to use muscle to make that happen. So you can tell your clients very definitively that, yes, as a matter of fact, I've used cardiovascular equipment like a bike in 1 minute increments at a very high intensity to work on quad development and then do air squats afterwards. Do, again, the bike, a very high intensity, 1 minute, and they're pushing not at a rate of 60 per minute. Maybe it's more on the order of like 40 or 30, right in that range. So they might get 15 on one side, 15 on the other, hop off, and we do air squats. So in that regard, I'm in a real sneaky way, even though it's a piece of cardiovascular equipment, I'm using it as a way to load them on the strength side. More of a programming note, but it's one that's kind of fun to play around with when you do your workouts on your own and also with your clients. Okay, so there's several suggestions that are given throughout this whole context of this chapter. And one of the specifics that they note, and it's one that you're going to see somewhere else, is they talk about running shoes should be replaced every 300 to 500 miles of use or every 6 months. Now, granted, if you're an avid runner, it might be a lot less miles than that, but you might be pounding your shoes a little bit more than somebody who's like a normal runner or a recreational runner. And if you're somebody who's doing more sprint work in your running shoes, that's going to cause your shoes to break down differently. So I would tell you, you're going to have some different things that you have to talk about when you talk about buying your shoes. You look at your body weight. Are you more obese? Then you're going to actually cause your shoes to wear out sooner. The other part of it is they talk about the different foot strikes that you have, and they suggest different shoe types. But I'll tell you, if you're talking about more sprint style training, you're going to be running, hitting, using more of the front part of the foot, kind of the arch forward, like we saw in the one example for dynamic flexibility. And we talked about having the person in or on the ball of their foot as they were doing that dynamic flexibility on the squat rack. I digress. The point is, what you're going to do with your shoes matters, and who is going to be in the shoes also matters. So let's jump into some of these suggestions for shoe types. If we look at this, let me get this guy out of the way. Hold on. All right, there we go. That's a little bit better. So if you look to the left here, you can see in the book, it's A, B, and C from the top to the bottom. A, B, C. And A is overpronation, and you can see the person's a little bit heavier on the inside border of their foot. Yeah, neutral, you can see here in terms of Achilles tendon, that is nice and straight. There's no curve to it at all. When we look at underpronation, that's very much like a supinated position, or inverted versus everted, if you want to think of this. Evert, invert. Long story short, the book makes some recommendations regarding this. If you're an overpronator, you should go with a straight style shoe. If you're a neutral, which is in the middle here, you're going to be a semi-curve. And if you're underpronating, you're already curved, you should probably go with one of these types of shoes. And I will tell you, I think that's a very overly broad categorization of what shoes you should pick, because you got to do you. If you're going to be running, however many hundred of miles in these shoes, they got to be shoes. They have to be shoes that work for you and don't destroy your body. Now, the one thing they do have, and they don't really know, but I grabbed a picture and I put it up here for you guys. It's this. When you go ahead and look at the wear patterns on shoes, this will tell you what style you are. Overpronator, neutral, underpronation, and those are real general terms. You can get more specific. And if you go to some specialty shops, they can get really specific. But if you look at this, you can see the outside edges of these shoes are pretty well worn out, which tells you this person spends a lot of time on the outside edges of their feet, which tells you they're more of an underpronator. So in this example, this person would probably go with a curved style shoe per the book. But I will tell you, if you have the opportunity, just take a look at your shoes, flip them over, look at the underside, and see where your wear patterns are, and that gives you an idea of if you're an over, under, or neutral foot position. All right, cardiovascular machines. They talk about treadmills, stair climbers, ellipticals, stationary bikes, and upper body ergometers. And the upper body ergometers, they really don't elaborate on too much. Those are very specialty oriented. I have some people who, because of a stroke, they can't really use their lower body, so we do a lot of upper body ergometer work. I'm going to leave that off to the side, but let's just go ahead and get through this and kind of go through some of the basic stuff that they have. And they go into like the primary muscles used, how to get on a dang treadmill. I mean, come on. Some of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I need to bury you in the nuances of how to actually start on a treadmill. With this, I'm going to let you guys review that information on your own. I'm going to go ahead and focus on my cut and paste information from the book to go ahead and hit these topics. When we get into treadmill running, when a client transitions from outside to inside, they don't experience the same environmental influence. And the book notes this. There's no wind, no rain, no terrain changes. And the book lists that the lack of wind resistance is the primary issue. But I have to ask, what if you're running with the wind coming back in? Then their statement doesn't make any sense. I will tell you, when you run on a treadmill versus run outside, and I've done this forever, I've always put it at about a 1% grade. That way I'm actually pushing off, however slightly, just a little bit. Because otherwise what happens is, when you run on a treadmill and you're at 6 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, whatever speed you're running, when you pick your foot up and you put it down on the belt, because the belt is moving, whoosh, it takes your foot and moves it backwards. That's even true for the curved treadmills that don't have a motor, but it's done so by gravity. And so as a result, you have to put a slight incline into the equation, so you actually are pushing off on that belt to propel yourself up. Great. Now, granted, the greater the incline, the harder the work level, etc. You can play around with that. But my point to you is, the book lists its wind resistance is a reason why you have to go to 1% grade, but I will tell you that even though that may be an answer somewhere else, I find fault with that, because you might be running against the wind one way, coming back with the wind the other way. And just in some regard, what we're talking about is when you're running on a treadmill to mimic more, better mimic outside, you have to put it at 1% grade, so you're actually pushing off. Okay, I know this is going to be silly, but when you look at like the two types of stair climbers, you have pedal, blip, 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 then you have escalator where it's step, 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 usually called a step mill. You'll often see people draping themselves over the railing. They're holding themselves up, putting their arms on the console, and they're shrugging their shoulders here. They're in scapular elevation, both of which are done to reduce workload, and both of which reduce balance requirements. So, you got to coach your people to not use their hands. It's going to freak them out at first, but you'd rather have them not use their hands or just use their hands for a little balance check. That's it. They note this in a question on a test somewhere. The appropriate range of movement is usually 4 to 8 inches for a person. If you have too high of a step, they denote it as depth. If you have too high of a step, what happens is a person has to rock over to one side to pick their foot up and rock over to pick up their foot on the other side. So they talk about rates per step, 43 to 95 steps per minute. And I will tell you that varies. I've worked with clients who are super aggressive and work harder than that. And if you're doing a warm up, it might be less than that. And there's different variations. You'll see people walking up the step mill 1 step at a time, every other step, going up kind of sideways, side saddle. So they're working on their abductors. They might walk up backwards. They might even in a tilted over position. So they're getting a little more hamstring development. It just depends. You'll see all different types of variations on this. And to a certain degree, all are fine and both are all are appropriate. Elliptical trainer, usually used as a compromise to running due to like reduced impact. Uses many of the same muscles, but differently, right? Whether it's step mill, stair climber, or treadmill, they're all kind of using the same muscles, lower body and upper body. And with stair steppers, users will oftentimes hang on the railing, but if they have the alternating handles, that's the best case scenario for them to be able to move their arms and their legs at the same time. And I've had clients actually switch back and forth from focusing upper body to focusing lower body to focusing upper body pull to focusing lower body to focusing upper body push, right? So I just changed the sequencing a little bit, but I know this is seen somewhere else in a quiz question. Non-weight bearing, they talk about a bike. And with a bike, they list it as non-weight bearing because you're seated. And even with that, you're still pushing down to a pedal. So you're going to have some ground reactive forces that come back through the pedal. It sounds kind of quirky, but they make it a point to focus on the seat height and the amount of knee flexion. So take note of this. They talk about the knee at about 25 to 30 degrees of flexion, though they don't particularly show that here. That's what they show here. I would say you're probably going to be a little bit straighter than this, but they want you at 25 to 30 degrees. And they talk about also the workloads experienced on a recumbent bike are actually a little bit lower because you're in that recumbent lean back position as opposed to being upright. I will tell you when I work with clients, I also have them focus on the push, push, push. And then because of the pedal straps, I also have them work on a pulling motion as well in terms of the pedal stroke. So with that, I have them focus very quad oriented. And then when they're pulling, it becomes a little more hamstring oriented. The book begs to differ on this, but I can tell you that it definitely makes a difference. Okay, so rowing machine, you'll have plenty of people tell you how you're doing it wrong, doing it right. In some regard, just get on there and grip it and rip it to some degree. But with this, it's a total body exercise, uses a ton of different muscle groups from upper and lower body. The book takes a lot of care to talk about the start, the drive, the finish, the recovery, and catch phases, which I don't think you see anywhere else, anywhere in the context of his class. But they also note the basic resistance principles of an air-resisted flywheel, and this is something you'll see later. As more air is allowed through the vent, the resistance on the flywheel increases. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump out of this one. I'm going to jump into the next one, and I'll see you in a moment.